2-5A playoff picture gets a little more clarity after this past weekend's games, and now some of the teams will be fighting the next 4 weeks for that last postseason spot. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Football Fever, brought to you by LISD TV and LoneStarVarsity.com, your source for everything high school football here on the South Plains. I'm Travis Cram. With me, as always, is George Watson from the Avalanche-Journal. And George, with some of the wins and losses this past weekend, now we'll be able to see who's sitting on top of that division or district to get the playoffs and who's going to need some wins.
Yeah, it was a interesting week for 2-5A for a lot of teams. Some results that I think were expected, some that maybe were a little unexpected. But the end result is now that you're starting to see that there are 3 or 4 teams up there in Odessa Permian and Midland and Odessa High, that are really in complete control of their playoff destiny. And then there's teams, especially here in the LISD, Coronado and Monterey, that are really hanging by a couple of threads, some more than others. I think, you're talking about Lubbock High, their loss to Tascosa. Now they're 0-5. I think, if not mathematically, their playoff chances are all but done. Then you're talking about Coronado and Monterey, both sitting there at 2-3, but in kind of different ways. Monterey's got the much tougher schedule ahead. They've still got to play Odessa. They've still got to play Midland Lee. But Coronado, they've still got games against San Angelo Central. They got a game still against Permian coming up, but then they also have, Monterey on the schedule and the likes of that. So I think Coronado's schedule, the way they're playing is probably a little bit lined up better to be able to maybe sneak into the playoffs. Monterey is really going to have to come up with 4 weeks of really intense, hard-nosed, successful football to really kind of, get back into the playoff picture, I think.
And it started with this past Thursday night, Tascosa and Lubbock High, and it was road trip weekend for us at the AJ. George getting to go to Amarillo and see that one. Tascosa really pours it on after the second quarter. They score all 40 points.
Yeah, it was really kind of the story of Lubbock High's season. They play well in the first quarter. They get a field goal. They're leading 3-0. But then, they really can't sustain it. After about a quarter and a half, Tascosa comes back, and it's just like a tidal wave of plays and things like that. And they score 40 straight points. It would have been 40 unanswered if not, if Lubbock High hadn't scored a touchdown late in the game. But like I said, it was really kind of the same old story for Lubbock High, just not enough depth. Coach Speck talking after the game, they're having to take guys out of, their normal jerseys to move them, offensive line positions, so they got to switch jerseys on them. They're having to move a lot of people around in playing in different places that they really haven't played before. So it's a lot of that same thing that Lubbock High has faced, this year, not being able to match up for over, the length of the game. They can do it in spurts, but not over the length of the game.
Yeah, 3 turnovers in the game for the Westerners. The next one was, of course, Amarillo High taking on Monterey out at Lowry. And 2 teams that were 2-2 going into that one. Whoever got the win was going to have that upper hand for that 4th spot. Amarillo takes it in this one.
Yeah, they did. And it was really an interesting kind of game. And you're talking about a first quarter that was really dominated, on the scoreboard-wise by Amarillo. They get a touchdown. They get a field goal. They miss the extra point, so it's sitting there at 9-0. But then Monterey comes back, and they're moving the ball really well. They're getting a couple turnovers, and they're moving the ball in between the 20s really well. They can't punch it into the end zone, so they're sitting there relying on 3 Tracy to block a field goal, and it's 9.5. Well, you come out in the second half, Amarillo goes down, gets a touchdown. Monterey comes right back and gets a touchdown. You're sitting there at 16-16. Looks like Monterey's got the momentum. They get a field goal to start the 4th quarter, but then Amarillo, hits a big pass play to their talented receiver, Benny Shepard, and it's really kind of over from there. They score a couple of late touchdowns and go and win 30-19 and really get that upper hand. And that's why I think what puts Monterey in such a bad position, because if they'd have won that game against Amarillo, they're obviously 3-2, and I think the schedule is not as harsh to them, down the stretch, between 3-2 and 2-3. But now at 2-3, that's why I think their schedule is really going to be a struggle for them coming down the stretch.
All right, Coronado now sitting in the same boat with Monterey. They dropped to 2-3 after losing to Midland at Ronda Communications Stadium, and it was a game that you didn't know what was going to happen. 3 touchdowns in the first 5 minutes, but Midland again pulls away. They stay on top with Odessa Permian.
Yeah, it's been kind of a weird season for Coronado in the fact that they've never really been able to put a complete offensive and defensive game together. Either the offense has been playing well, but they've been giving up a lot of yards and a lot of points, or the defense has been playing well and the offense has struggled. So they really haven't been able to put it all together. And when you have those kind of seasons, you're going to get into a shootout, like they did against Midland, like they did against Odessa High, and games like that. And right now, the way their defense is, has a tendency to give up some big plays and some big yards. That's what happens, and that's what keeps them from being able to push over the threshold is not being able to stop offenses when they have to. And Midland, we know they have a good offense with Darius Miller, and they're able to throw the ball, and Midland was able to make the plays down the stretch to be able to win the ball game.
Yeah, and I think one thing when we look at Midland High, I didn't know much about them, of course, going into the year. They lose that first non-district game, but then they go in, they give up almost a little over 400 yards of offense to Coronado, but hold them in the red zone. I think that was a big key for them, and that's something. They held Miller on defense for most of that game when I was watching it. So that's impressive to see that their coach, Coach Yenzer, wants to keep him in on that defense, hold Coronado for whatever they can because he knows they're going to get back in there and score. Maybe that's something we're going to see more from Midland High.
Yeah, I mean, they did the same thing to Monterey the week before. I think it was a pretty close game. Throughout the first half, Monterey led 17-14. Neither team really making plays, but then Midland kind of got some offensive big plays, and then its defense really buckled down against Monterey 2 weeks ago, and that's what allowed them to get that win. They did the same thing I think against Coronado, a different style of offense, obviously, and like you said, Coronado is kind of lived off the big plays a lot in that game, but they were able to limit those as much as they possibly could and keep Coronado out of the end zone when it mattered the most.
All right, Estacado and Perryton starting off with 1 3A district play finally, and Estacado gets a big district win to start off that play.
Huge win for Estacado, and one they really had to fight for. It was a back-and-forth game. Neither team really was able to take very good control of the game for a long period of time. But then late in the fourth quarter, I guess midway through the fourth quarter, Estacado gives up a touchdown. Perryton comes in and gets the score, and they're up 24-14 at 2 scores in the fourth quarter. You're thinking, well, that might have been the decisive score. All of a sudden, Estacado's speed just comes roaring back. Alton White with a big 96-yard kickoff return straight up the middle, untouched. I mean, just blazes right through Perryton. All of a sudden, you're at 24-21 again. The defense gets a stop. The offense gets the ball back, goes in and scores. Augustine Biggity, a big game from him, the sophomore running back, gets the decisive touchdown. But then Estacado has to hold the ball, or has to hold off Perryton. Perryton drives down, and they're facing a 4th and 2 at the 3-yard line. And they get, just right here. There is just that much space between the first down and the tip of that ball. Estacado's defense is able to hold them down on the 1-yard line, get the ball back, run out the clock, and get the win. Just a huge way for the Matadors to start off district play.
A big stand for the Matadors on defense. Another team that's been making stands all over District 4 play has been basically Friendship, just rolling through. They take on Big Spring, they go down, score 39 points in the first 3 quarters, and then just have to pull back the reins and watch it.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting game for Friendship in the fact that they're going to Big Spring, and we talked about Big Spring as maybe one of the surprise teams in this district here. A big road win for Friendship, a big road game for Friendship. They're going down there. Big Spring is without their all-state middle linebacker, Kate Hollinsworth, without another linebacker, and then 4 of their players are injured in a car accident Thursday night, before the Friday game, and one of those is their leading rusher, Monty Anderson, who's a very talented running back. So Big Spring kind of goes in, a little depleted depth, in their talent, and, but Friendship's not going to sit there and say, we feel sorry for you. They're going to go in, and they went in and took care of business, got a big lead, led 25-14 halftime, and then put up a couple touchdowns in the third quarter and pulled away. And the defense, for Friendship again did an outstanding job holding Big Spring. A big road win that I think really separates Abilene Cooper and Friendship now in that district, and you really, I think, forces everybody else to start playing for third and fourth place.
The 2 teams we're going to learn more about later in the show is they're going to be going head-to-head this next week. Littlefield gets a big win over Abernathy. Idalou does what they do best. They shut out Post. They've now held 2 3-2A teams to 0 points. Yep. Now, so we're going to learn a little bit more about them.
And the third one they held to 10. So
that's right.
The defense for Idalou is really playing well, and Littlefield has gotten a couple of last-second wins. So it'll be interesting to see. Those 2 6-0 teams are. That's pretty much for the 3-2A title right there.
All right. When we come back, find out who earned the right to be this week's Player of the Week right here on the Fever.
Hi, I'm Jay Novacek, former tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. For all your highlights and scores, go to LoneStarVarsity.com.